Welcome to episode 2 in our series on The Path of the Just by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And we are about to start chapter 2. And just to recap, the previous chapter at the end, we were reminded of the kind of structure of this book is based upon the teachings of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who taught in Avodah Zorah 20b that this kind of, the steps and this ladder of this kind of ascension, a holy ascension, is done by various steps, and they are Torah, which leads to vigilance, vigilance which leads to alacrity or zeal, alacrity leads to cleanliness, cleanliness leads to abstinence, abstinence leads to purity, purity leads to piety, piety leads to humility, humility leads to fear of sin, and fear of sin leads to holiness. So those are the steps that this book is based around, and the Ramchal is going to start now with the concept of vigilance and how we have to examine our ways. If we consider that God told us in the Torah that we must guard our souls. You must consider yourself that you are in possession of a piece of God that has to be guarded and kept pure, and you are almost like a sentry on guard against things in the world that would bespoil it or somehow degrade it in various ways. And we know there are these things around us that tend to soil the soul. So we are bid to guard our souls. So the idea of vigilance is very important. You don't want to fall asleep at your post, so to speak, and let the enemy in, which is what the Yetzer Hara, or the kind of evil inclination, is. If you let your guard down, or you act in a way that is surrendering in some way, you allow yourself to be taken over by something else, and you'll be led astray, and you'll go down a few levels perhaps, and you make this path, this ascension, a lot more difficult. So the idea of vigilance is be on the lookouts, be on the front foot, so to speak, in your life over things that perhaps are no good for you, and by guarding your soul, you not only look after yourself, but you gain a kind of guard of yourself and your life, or providence through God, because this is what God wants you to do. So we're going to begin with this chapter 2, the virtue of vigilance. So the Ramchal begins. The concept of vigilance relates to a person's actions and affairs. He must contemplate and survey his actions and his conduct to see whether they are good or not, so as not to risk the loss of his soul, heaven forbid. And he must not pursue his habits thoughtlessly, the way a blind person walks as if in darkness. This is surely something that is dictated by common sense. Is it conceivable that, when a person has sufficient knowledge and understanding to save himself and avoid the loss of his soul, he should willingly close his eyes to his own salvation? There is nothing as base and as foolish as this. He who acts this way is inferior to the animals and the beasts that instinctively protect themselves, fleeing and escaping from anything that appears harmful to them. He who walks in this world without contemplating whether his path is good or not is like a blind man who is walking along a riverbank. He is in grave danger and more likely to come to harm than to be saved. For the risks of natural blindness or of willful blindness, the latter meaning that one ignores the issues consciously and deliberately, are one and the same. Now the Ramchal is going to describe the lack of vigilance in Yirmiyahu's generation, one of the prophets. Yirmiyahu bemoaned the evils of his generation, among whom this affliction was like a plague. They paid no heed to their actions, and they failed to consider whether they should embrace them or flee from them. And he said, and he makes a reference to them in Yirmiyahu chapter 8, verse 6, "No man feels remorse for his wickedness, saying, 'What have I done?' As one person, they rush to stay their course, like a horse charging headlong into battle." In other words, they were constantly propelled forward by the impulsiveness of their habits and ways, without leaving themselves time to critically examine their conduct. As a result, they fell into wrongdoing without being aware of it. So that's very true. Even today, we have this that's kind of peer pressure sometimes to act in a certain way. You've got social media that is almost herding you in a way of thought that other people devise for you, and you are following along headlong with other people, following new and perhaps inferior trains of thoughts that are only going to do you harm ultimately, and are going to affect your mindset in a detrimental way. And the Ramchal continues, "This is surely one of the shrewd ploys of the evil inclination, which relentlessly labours to burden the hearts of people until they are left with no spare moment, either to contemplate or to observe the path they are taking. For it knows that if they would only minimally devote attention to their ways, they would, no doubt, immediately begin to regret their deeds, and this regret would intensify until they would abandon sin altogether." So we know that nowadays our time is a very valuable commodity. We find less and less time. A lot of us are involved in vocations that take up a lot of our time, and the rest of the time perhaps is devoted to other things. We find very little time to actually sit down and work on ourselves, which is something that perhaps is very, very important. And also just society today, kind of, if you don't take care, you find yourselves completely wrapped up in trivialities. This is what the Ramchal is going to refer to now when he describes Pharaoh as a kind of master of this sneaky, enveloping danger. So the Ramchal continues, "This is similar to the advice of that wicked Pharaoh who said," and he quotes from Shemot 5:9, "The work shall be made harder for the men, so that they shall be busy doing it and not talk about trivialities." His intent was not only to deny them any respite from their work, to take note of their own plight, or to plot against him, but also to prevent them from any reflection by means of ceaseless toil. This is precisely the device that the evil inclination employs against people, for he is a master of war, trained in cunning, and it is only possible to escape him by acquiring great wisdom and foresight. This is what the prophet expressed when he cried out, and he quotes Haggai, chapter 1, verse 5, "Let your hearts attend to your ways." And also King Solomon in his wisdom said in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 4, "Give neither sleep to your eyes nor slumber to your eyelids. Escape as a deer from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from its ensnarement." And also he quotes from Moed Katan, page 5a, "Whoever evaluates his pathways in this world will gain the reward of seeing the redemption wrought by the Holy One, blessed be He." Yet it is obvious even if a person supervises his conduct, it is not within his power to achieve salvation without the assistance of the Holy One, blessed be He. For the evil inclination is extremely tenacious, as it says in Psalms chapter 37. "The wicked scouts out the righteous and seeks to kill him, but the Eternal will not leave him within his hands. At the same time, if a person oversees himself, the Holy One, blessed be He, will assist him, and he will be saved from the evil inclination. But if he does not oversee his conduct, certainly the Holy One, blessed be He, will not watch over him. For if he is not compassionate towards himself, who will show him compassion? This is similar to what our rabbis of blessed memory have said, and he quotes from Barachot 33a. It is forbidden to pity anyone who has no intelligence. And elsewhere they have said, and he quotes from Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 1, verse Mishnah 14, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And that concludes the second chapter on the virtue of vigilance. And it's very simple. At the end of that chapter, we're left with this very simple option. Look after your own soul, and then God will look after you. It's as simple as that. Take care to look inwardly and look outwardly at what poses a danger to yourself and to your soul. Your soul is a part of God. You look after a part of God, He will look after you. And you needn't worry about the Yetzer Hara or evil inclination. So look after yourself, look after your soul, and let God look after you. And that concludes this episode, and I look forward to the next episode, which where the Ramchal describes the elements of vigilance.